When American frontier travelers pushed through deserts, plains and mountain passes in the 1800s, they carried rifles for defense and axes for labor. But the resource that decided whether they lived to see the next settlement wasn't ammunition or firewood. It was water. Many diaries from the era record long, punishing stretches with no rivers, no wells, and no rainfall. Yet again and again, frontiersmen, scouts and homesteaders mention a simple technique that helped them locate drinkable water long before the land showed any obvious signs of it. This wasn't a superstition, and it wasn't a desperate gamble. It was fieldcraft, honed by Native Americans, adopted by fur trappers, and quietly passed down through generations who understood how to read land in a way most modern hikers never learn. It is one of the most practical emergency water tricks you can still use today, and it requires no fancy gear. Stay with me, because this method is as real today as it was on the Oregon Trail, and it could make the difference between dehydration and survival during a backwoods emergency. Now let's dig into the real technique and, well, what made it so reliable. The method begins with a simple observation that early travelers learned directly from Native American guides. Moisture reveals itself through the behavior of wildlife long before it reveals itself through vegetation. Animals follow predictable routes to water, and these paths become subtle but readable corridors through brush grass or prairie dust. Frontier scouts called them draw lines, and once you learn to recognize them, they become a dependable trail marker. These paths tend to narrow toward a single point and show signs of repeated traffic, flattened grass, disturbed soil, or maybe even a slight trough. The trick lies not in finding any animal path, but in finding the intersection of several. When multiple trails converge, you're almost always looking at a route that leads to a water source such as a Seep Spring Creek or a low spot where moisture collects. To apply this today, practice observing how movement patterns appear around water sources in your own environment. Visit a pond or stream and trace outward. You'll see faint wildlife tracks radiating away like spokes. Once you train your eyes, you'll start noticing these lines even in unfamiliar territory. The second part of the trick involved reading micro-terrain. Frontier scouts were experts at identifying depressions, folds, and shaded pockets where water naturally settles. Even when the soil looked bone dry, subtle changes in ground color, plant height, or the density of insect activity hinted at moisture below the surface. The most effective frontier technique was to walk along shallow valleys or gullies that sloped even slightly downward. These were natural drainage lines. Even during droughts, water tends to linger underground in low spots, and many frontier accounts describe men digging small gypsy wells, shallow pits in likely areas, to access subsurface seepage. A hole dug a foot or two deep in the right spot could produce clear, slow-filling water within minutes. To test this yourself, just walk the edge of a dry creek bed or a low gully after a period without rain. Dig a small hole in the shaded side of the depression. If moisture appears or the soil feels cool and dark, well, you're using the method exactly as frontier scouts did. Contrary to survival myths, frontier water finding was not about spotting a single green plant and assuming there was water nearby. Plants were only used as a secondary check once animal paths and terrain already suggested a likely area. Certain species, such as willows, cottonwoods, and sedges, tend to grow where groundwater is close to the surface. However, the trick wasn't to rely on any one plant. It was to see clusters that matched the shape of the terrain. For example, a thin line of cottonwoods running through a patch of dry grass often marks an underground water flow following a buried creek bed. A practical way to learn this is to study local tree lines around known water sources. Notice how the greenery stretches in predictable patterns rather than random patches. Once you've seen these patterns enough times, they become intuitive. Modern hikers often rely on maps, GPS, or water filters, but those tools fail if you lose them or conditions change unexpectedly. The frontier method remains one of the most reliable no-gear techniques for identifying likely water sources during emergencies. It combines animal movement, landform analysis, and vegetation patterns into a single approach that works anywhere, from open plains to desert washes to wooded hillsides. Try a simple training exercise on your next hike. Without checking a map, predict where the next water source might be based solely on the land around you. Use animal tracks, terrain shape, and plant distribution. Then, verify your guess with the map later. Practice this enough times and it becomes instinctual. Frontier water sources were not always pristine, and smart scouts boiled or filtered water whenever possible using cloth or sand. In a modern context, never drink untreated water directly from a seep or wildlife-frequented spring. Always boil, filter, or at least chemically treat it. The trick is about locating water, not skipping purification. If this deep dive into frontier water finding sparked a new appreciation for old-school fieldcraft, make sure you subscribe, share this guide with fellow history enthusiasts, and keep joining me as we uncover more forgotten outdoor skills that still hold their value today. Backyard Wisdom is here to keep these timeless techniques alive.